I'd like to introduce our guest teacher, Ryuko Laura Burges, a lay entrusted dharma teacher in the Soto Zen tradition, lectures and leads retreats at practice centers in Northern California. She received monastic training at Tassajara Zen Mountain Center, the first Zen Buddhist monastery in the United States. Laura has taught children and mentored other teachers, helping to bring mindfulness practice into the elementary classroom. That is so important. Laura is active in recovery, co-founded the Sangha in Recovery program at the San Francisco Zen Center, and is the abiding teacher at Lenox House Meditation Group in Oakland. Her two children's books are Buddhist Stories for Kids and Zen for Kids. Her latest book is The Zen Way of Recovery, an illuminated path out of the darkness of addiction. And about the topic of the teaching is the Zen Way of Recovery. Laura will be sharing from her recently released book, The Zen Way of Recovery, an illuminated path out of the darkness of addiction, a collection of Dharma talks on teachings that are congruent with recovery. The twin paths of Zen practice and recovery have evolved and sustained her since she got sober in 1985. Whoa. And I will post a link to the book to the chat. And welcome, Laura. It's a pleasure to have you again with us, because I heard just before we started that you have been here before as well. So welcome, and the screen is yours.
Well, thank you so much, Susanna. It's wonderful to be here and to see so many of you joining us. I'm very, very happy to share the teachings with you that have supported me in my practice and my recovery. I'd like to begin with a guided meditation. In Zen practice, usually we sit in silence, following our breath. I think because we're all here coming from many different paths, it would be helpful to share an experience with one another, just to help us enter this moment with one another and be present together. This is a meditation offered by John Selby in his book, Expand This Moment. What I'd like to do is say each of these phrases and have you let them permeate your mind and body, and then just gently release them and be open and receptive to the next phrase. So if you'll assume your meditation posture, it's important, if we are physically able, to sit up straight with some strength in our lower back. Take a few cleansing deep breaths. And invite those places in your body where you might be holding tension to gently release. I choose to enjoy this moment. I feel the air as it enters and leaves my body. I also feel the movement in my chest and belly as I breathe. I'm aware of my whole body, awake and alive, all at once, here in this present moment. I am ready to experience the feelings in my heart. I let go of all my stress and worry and feel peaceful inside. I accept everyone I know just as they are. I honor and love myself just as I am. I am open to receive. I feel connected with my source. I am here to serve, to love, to prosper, and to enjoy myself. I am ready to act with courage and integrity. I choose to enjoy this moment. Thank you. Wonderful to have that time together. I'd like to say a little bit about how I came to practice and to recovery. In Zen, we call this way-seeking mind. I began drinking when I was a teenager, and it was magical. Suddenly I was comfortable in my skin. I could talk to people, I could dance, I could be a wild woman. And I really felt that, I had tried other drugs before alcohol, but I never knew what was going to happen when I took drugs. And with alcohol, I had the delusion that I knew what was going to happen. Of course, that changed later. But I saw alcohol at first as this ecstatic yes to life. And yet in my early drinking, there were the signs that I came to understand were the signs of alcoholism. Craving. Once I started drinking, I would drink till it was gone. I always wanted more. A personality change. I became a very different person from the shy person I was when I wasn't drinking. And of course, the mystery of blackouts, where I would wake up and not know where I was or how I got there. And that was very troubling to me, but it didn't make me stop. Because another sign of alcoholism, of course, is continued use despite negative consequences. Well, I had some wonderful, wonderful adventures behind alcohol, but it led me to a cabin in Alaska in the snow where I was contemplating suicide. Something that had gotten my attention in Alaska was I had come to out of a blackout crawling in the snow. And I knew that people in Alaska died that way. So in this cabin where I was actually contemplating ending my life, I had this moment of clarity, this moment of hope that it might have something to do with the way I was living my life, and that perhaps I should seek a spiritual solution. And so I left Alaska. I came back to San Francisco, where I experienced pitiful, incomprehensible demoralization. I didn't want to drink anymore with wild abandon, but I had no control over my drinking. And so I started this spiritual search, which led me to some different spiritual groups. But finally, I came to the San Francisco Zen Center, and I was able to just stop drinking and sit down on the cushion in the Zendo at San Francisco Zen Center. I cried almost every time I sat down. When I first began to practice Zazen, I think I was detoxing. You know, a friend of mine who's not an alcoholic said, alcohol is like a credit card for pain. You pay it back later with interest. And I think that's what I was doing when I first began to meditate. In short order, I was at the Tassajara Zen Mountain Center, and I loved the rigor of monastic life, getting up at 4:30 in the morning and meditating, and study hall, the rigor of chopping wood and carrying water, as we say in Zen. I loved it. And I also loved the clarity of not drinking. I knew immediately that there had been something about the way I drank that was warping my life. But after 5 years of Zen practice, someone offered me a drink, and I took it. And nothing terrible happened, but I continued to drink for 5 years. Now, I was a Zen Buddhist wearing a black robe and chanting in Japanese, so it wasn't acceptable for me to drink the way I had. But I would say I was a binge drinker. I had my marriage had ended, but I had a beautiful daughter, and I didn't want her to grow up in an alcoholic home as I had. So I had this kidding myself that I was hiding it from her. So after one very, very bad run, I came to in a classroom at San Francisco State. I had gone back to school to get a teaching credential, and something deep within my being called out, please, please help me. And that had never happened before. I've heard so many people in recovery say that. In that moment, I was surrendering. I was recognizing that I was powerless over alcohol and that my life had become unmanageable. And I got up out of that classroom and I went out in the hallway. They used to have these things called phone booths. And I went to the phone booth and I looked in the phone book and I called a recovery program. And that was September 28th, 1985. And I haven't had a drink since then. Only because I was so desperate. I know that relapse is a very normal part of recovery, but I had done all my relapsing before I stepped into the rooms. What I found was that my Buddhist practice began to bloom with the clarity of sobriety. Another thing that propelled me into recovery was that I recognized that I knew of many, many Buddhist teachers, you know their names, whose addictions had damaged or destroyed their communities. And I thought I could sit still for 7 days during a Zen sesshin. And so could these Zen masters who could give us beautiful dharma talks, and yet we're powerless over their addiction. And so for me, I know this isn't true of everybody. I've continued to visit the rooms of recovery and practice the principles of recovery actively. And for me, these twin paths have been a wonderful, wonderful safety net against the ravages of addiction, which is rampant in my family. In 2000, I began leading retreats and lecturing about the congruence between Buddhism and recovery. And I've wanted for a long time to write a book about this, but I did not want to break my anonymity. And I found a way to do that in this book, The Zen Way of Recovery, an Illuminated Path Out of the Darkness of Addiction. I'm a little sheepish about that title. That's a pretty tall order. But I'd like to read you a chapter from this book. This is chapter 14, Erroneous Imaginations. Erroneous Imaginations. And that line comes from the Hokkyo Zamai by Tozan Ryokai. This is the Song of the Jewel Mirror Samadhi. And whenever I chant this particular sutra, these words stand out for me. When erroneous imaginations cease, the acquiescent mind realizes itself. At Zen Center, we chant the Hokkyo Zamai, or the Song of the Jewel Mirror Samadhi. And it tells us that when erroneous imaginations cease, the acquiescent mind realizes itself. When we loosen the grip of our self-created suffering, our flowing, flexible, big mind is able to shine forth. Perhaps our most pervasive erroneous imagination is, I am alone, a stranded individual in my own tiny boat. But actually, we are deeply connected to all things and all beings. The air we breathe is given to us by the trees. The ground supports us. Without the rain and the sun, we couldn't exist for a single moment. Each person we encounter becomes part of our mind, body, through the 5 senses that literally bring others inside us through our hearing and seeing. Perhaps we would treat one another differently and would feel more at home in the world if we kept in mind the Buddha's notion that each person we meet was our mother in another lifetime. I guess that depends on how you feel about your mother, but that's what the Buddha said. An erroneous imagination that I entertained for years was the idea that I could drink like other people. I did drink like other people, but those other people were alcoholics. So this erroneous imagination, this idea that somehow I could control and enjoy drinking, took me to dark and dangerous places. Until I awakened to the truth that 1 is too many and 1,000 is not enough, I was powerless over alcohol and its consequences. There's an ancient curse, which is often attributed to the Chinese, but more likely originated in England. May you live in interesting times. We are living in interesting times, navigating a global pandemic, witnessing the ravages of climate change, surrounded by rampant Orwellian doublespeak, looking askance at the deep divisions and rancor in our communities. Around the world, there are mass migrations, ongoing wars, shortages of clean air and water, and terrible, terrible poverty. A startling example of our interconnection with one another is the way in which a pandemic can travel so quickly around the world from being to being. So this is a time of not knowing what comes next, a time of uncertainty, and this can draw us into a perpetual state of unease. Our imagination can lead us to fearful places. As I heard someone in a meeting say, my mind is a dangerous neighborhood. Fear is often an erroneous imagination. When we fear the future, our imagination can run away with us, conjuring up every possible worst case scenario. We can also fear the past in the form of regret, thinking that we can never undo the harm we have done, that we have warped our lives. We fear that we have created problems in the past that we can't begin to unravel. We create a whole reality about the future or past, and then we forget that we made it all up. We can forget to notice that not all the disasters that we imagine come to pass. A tremendous amount of our energy and awareness go into these kind of imaginings. When we're trapped in this fearful state of mind, we don't notice that we have abandoned the present moment. We can have the same response to both imagined danger and real danger. Physiologically, even in our imagination, if we're imagining a fearful thing, we shut down when we're in fear. Our vision becomes narrow, our breath quick, our palms sweaty, our choices limited. Our awareness becomes similar to looking through the wrong end of a telescope, and we no longer have the full range of our consciousness at our disposal. Distracted by fear, we are no longer here. This morass tends to lessen the time, ability, and energy we might have turned toward doing something to help the world and other people. I've heard people in recovery characterize fear as false evidence appearing real, another way of citing erroneous imaginations. Now we're able to step back a bit and watch fear arise just as we watch our breath. We can say, oh, there you are, my old friend fear. We can look down and see our feet on the ground, look around us at the world that surrounds us and say to ourselves, right now, I'm okay, which we usually are. Practice enables us to cultivate an open, flexible, responsive mind, the acquiescent mind of the Hokyozumai. In the grip of fear, I can open to it, breathe into it, stay with it. We may feel guilt or shame about negative emotions such as fear and anger, but this just adds suffering to suffering. These emotions aren't always negative. Fear can be an important protection from real dangers. Anger can spur us to action against injustice. Our Zen ancestor Dogen, a 12th century monk who's credited with bringing Chan or Zen from China to Japan, Dogen said, settle the self on the self. This is settle the small, self-interested, fearful self on the big self of big mind. We could settle our small, frightened self on big mind, a deeper ground of being that we sometimes glimpse in meditation or at unexpected moments in our lives. Here's a list of the 5 fears in Buddhist teachings. Fear of loss of livelihood. Fear of loss of reputation. Fear of loss of life. Fear of unusual states of mind. And interestingly, fear of speaking in front of an assembly. Of course, I would have to add fear of being stuck somewhere with nothing to read, but that's just my fear. Most people have probably been prey to these fears at times, these 5 fears. They are particularly vivid for those of us in recovery because our livelihood, our reputation, our very lives were threatened by the rash and self-destructive actions we took when under the influence. Many of us spent years seeking unusual states of mind because we weren't comfortable with the ones we already had. We speak of having needed to take a drink or a few before a social event so that we would have the courage to talk to other people. When I was drinking, I lived constantly with a feeling of impending doom. Looking back, I know now what that feeling was. It was impending doom. Fear is a gift if it motivates us to seek sobriety. One of the first Zen stories I heard was the story the Buddha told of a man who's running across a field being chased by a tiger. Holding onto a vine, he swings himself over the edge of a cliff and looks down and sees another tiger below, licking its chops and waiting for him to fall. Just then, a white mouse and a black mouse crawl out of a hole and start nibbling on the vine. The man looks over and sees a strawberry growing close by. He grasps it, and how sweet it tastes. This is a metaphor for our life, fearful, tenuous, fraught with difficulty and suffering, ultimately fatal, and also sweet. An antidote to erroneous imaginations, an antidote to paralyzing fear, is to remember the preciousness of having been born a human being and to understand impermanence. So, appreciating the preciousness of human life. It is easy to appreciate our human lives if we narrowly escape some accident or survive some traumatic event along with other people. In recovery, we find other people who have faced and survived a life-threatening disease, and we share a joyful relief and camaraderie that we don't necessarily find anywhere else. When we collectively go through a frightening episode, it can bring out the inherent heroism and generosity of human beings. People seem a little kinder, a little more gracious than usual. I saw this after 9/11. People were much more open to one another, miraculously letting someone else into traffic, for example. Talking to strangers, sharing our feelings with one another. We slow down a bit because we experience a more deeply precious and revocable human life. Through Buddhism, we realize that it is a great privilege to be born as a human being. We say, this chance rarely occurs in any lifetime, the chance to practice the way. To be born into a human body, rather than, say, a piece of moss on a rock, is a privilege that we shouldn't squander or take for granted. Hakuin Zenji, who was born in 1688 and died in 1769, one of our great Zen ancestors. There's wonderful stories about this wild man, this priest. He said, having had the great good fortune not only to have been born into this world as a human being, but also to have encountered the teaching of the great Shakyamuni Buddha, how can we help but be overjoyed? Having had the good fortune not only to have been born into this world as a human being, but also to have encountered the teachings of the great Shakyamuni Buddha, how can we help but being overjoyed? During the everyday chores of life or in times of sickness or hardship, we can slip into negativity or self-pity and forget that we have these problems because they go along with being a human being in a human body. If we were a piece of moss on a rock, we wouldn't have to take out the garbage or pay taxes. We wouldn't be subject to fear or anger, resentment or envy. But as far as I know, we also wouldn't be able to enjoy a sunset or to fall in love. Mindfulness awakens us to each moment, taking care of each thing as it arises, washing a dish with the same care we would wash a baby, tearing lettuce for the salad as tenderly as we would touch a flower. If we approach our everyday activities in this way, we awaken to the unique beauty of each moment and remember how precious it is just to be born as a human being. Suzuki Roshi said, just to be alive is enough. Just to be alive is enough. We can give ourselves a break from worry if we come back to the present moment and savor it. Recovery grants us the clarity and subtlety to be available for everyday life and to take joy in simple pleasures. Rather than seeking extremity and taking risks, which is what I did in my addiction, we can enjoy ordinary activities and find satisfaction in what is right in front of us. We can also marshal our talents, intelligence, and abilities to serve the world. You know, I got sober the month that I went back to school to get my teaching credential, and I spent 35 years teaching kids. And I never had to do that with alcohol in my breath. You know, I really felt strongly that I could not drink and be worthy of teaching children or of raising my daughter. And I know that she had, I could not get sober just for her, but I know that she had a much different life than she would have had I continued. The next thing to be grateful for is understanding impermanence. One of our erroneous imaginations is mistaking the impermanent for the permanent. Zazen, meditation, is literally practice for understanding impermanence. As I watch my breath come and go and watch feelings and thoughts come and go, I can see that even a difficult emotion like fear is not solid or never ending. Each moment arises and passes away, as do all things. If I can surrender to this moment, rather than living always in the past or future, I can be more fully alive and more fully myself. We want to be present for this moment because this is it. This is life itself. This is easy to believe, easy to say, not always easy to practice. Zazen can jog us out of our old ways of being, our old ways of thinking, old behaviors that don't serve us today. If we practice regularly, sitting down and following our breath and watching what arises and embracing it rather than pushing it away, we are more likely to notice when we are in the grip of erroneous imaginations. And we're more likely to carry this practice into our everyday life. Zazen helps us cultivate what Suzuki Roshi called beginner's mind. He said, the beginner's mind is open to many possibilities. The expert's is open to few. I can draw a wider circle of compassion that includes myself and others, rather than being trapped in a narrow, selfish state of fear or hatred. At the end of my drinking, I felt like I was trapped in a little stagnant pool of self. And I had to break out of that by living the principles of recovery, which also brought my Buddhist practice to life. If we live in fear today, that will affect also our future, because we are literally missing out on our lives and the possibilities and potentialities that await us. In a very real way, our actions today can affect even our past, because one way to make positive use of our remorse is to put our own preoccupations aside and help others. We find that the things that we did that we were so ashamed of, when shared with another, can help them identify with our story and recognize that recovery is possible even for the most damaged and destitute. In recovery, our fear of economic insecurity is healed by becoming employable, by taking better care of our finances, by avoiding unnecessary spending, by paying parking tickets when they happen, by saving for the future. Our fear of people begins to dissipate when we take responsibility for ourselves, when we tell our story, engage in service, and work with others. In recovery, I learned to live and let live. I sit with a diverse group of people I might never have known otherwise. I don't get up and leave a meeting because someone says something I don't like. I get there a little early and I stay after to offer fellowship to others. I stay in the meeting, stay with difficult feelings, stay with my fear and discomfort, knowing they will dissipate, and also knowing that any craving that might take hold of me will also dissipate. When I came to recovery, I was told you don't have to drink if you don't want to. But what really opened my heart was that I don't have to drink even if I do want to. And that has helped me stay sober one day at a time. So let's sit quietly for a couple of minutes and reflect on whatever might have arisen for you during this talk. Thank you very much for your kind attention. We'll just sit quietly for a second or two. I think it's time to open up for questions or comments. I do want to let you know that in my book, at the end of each chapter, there are reflections and practices around each theme of each chapter. And so the practices at the end of this chapter are helpful ones for opening up to and walking through our fears. Here. And I want to thank Susanna and everyone for being here, and the Buddhist Recovery Network for inviting me. I hope you'll have me back sometime. And again, my book is The Zen Way of Recovery. I love the cover they put on this, like a lotus in muddy water is our recovery. So thank you so much for being here. Thanks, Ron.
Thank you, Laura. And there is no doubt that, we will ask you to come back. This was amazing, and so I will say a few things as a closing, and then we will keep the room open for a few minutes for you guys to copy any links that we put to the chat, or if there's any practical questions, you can type to the chat as well if you need some links. There was some question about a poem. I don't know if you, Laura, have a time to scroll through the questions, so maybe you can type the answer in there if you find it. Somebody asked about the poem that you read in the beginning. But anyway, a few words about dana. Super important practice. Your generosity can help to strengthen the recovery community and to grow the academy, and can be a practical expression of gratitude and metta. We invite you to practice generosity and to give dana in support of these teachings to be shared with our teacher and with the Buddhist Recovery Network. So there will be a link in the chat that will take you to the BRN website, And please indicate if you remember that your gift is for the Academy. And there will be the next BRN Academy event is on Sunday. Oh, I forgot to put it here. So it's the first, I think it's the 1st of October. Kate Johnson is our guest then. And we have a Facebook group, and please answer the membership questions if you want to join. It's for the security of the group. And there is also a weekly Buddhist recovery meeting. The type of the meeting changes weekly. You can check the schedule on the webpage using the link that will be in the chat as well. And then, since we have a Buddhist evening, we will transfer our merits. So thank you for joining us today. May the merit we have gained go to the alleviation of the suffering of all beings. May we all be happy. May we all be peaceful. May we all be safe.